What kind of crime could possibly justify a punishment so gruesome that it left the condemned twisted, shattered, and displayed like a grotesque warning to all who passed? In medieval Europe, the answer was chillingly simple: anything that challenged authority, order, or the very fabric of society. Known as the breaking wheel, or Redden in German-speaking regions, this method of execution was not merely a punishment, it was a spectacle of annihilation. It was reserved for those deemed beyond redemption: murderers, highway robbers, traitors, and in certain territories, even those accused of sorcery or heresy. The act had to be public, intentional, and disruptive, crimes that shook the moral or political foundations of a kingdom. The breaking wheel was used all across Europe, especially in Germany, France, and Eastern Europe. It was the punishment for the worst crimes. In France, they made it official law in 1670, but people had been using this method long before that. Some stories say it goes back to the 800s, but the first real legal records we have are from the 1200s. A German law book called the Sachsenspiegel said very clearly that if someone killed another person on the road for no good reason, they should be broken on the wheel. But this punishment wasn't used on everyone equally. Medieval society had strict social classes, and your position in society decided how you would die. Rich nobles usually got their heads cut off with a sword or axe, which was considered a more respectful way to die. The wheel was saved for common people like farmers, beggars, and outsiders. These were people whose lives society thought didn't matter as much. Court records from Germany in the 1500s show that even smaller crimes could lead to the wheel if the person had done bad things before or if they scared the community. Stealing many times, attacking people repeatedly, or burning buildings during times when food was scarce could all lead to this punishment. The punishment was also made worse if the victim was someone important in society or politics. This terrible form of justice was meant to scare people as much as it was meant to punish criminals. The wheel was slow and deliberate. It was designed to break more than just the body. It was meant to destroy the person's spirit in front of everyone watching, completely and forever. When someone was sentenced to die by the wheel, their final journey was full of shame and humiliation. The prisoner was forced to walk through the streets, often without shoes, already beaten and bloody, sometimes barely clothed. This wasn't just an execution. It was like a play performed in public, designed to make everyone afraid. In the German territories, this walk usually went from the town jail to a high platform outside the city walls. These execution sites were called the High Court and were built up high so everyone could see what happened to criminals. Church bells would sometimes ring during the walk, not to pray for the condemned person, but to tell everyone in town that the show was about to begin. People who witnessed these walks in German cities like Nuremberg and Frankfurt wrote down what they saw. The criminal was tied up and sometimes forced to carry the wheel or a wooden cross as one final insult. Along the way, angry crowds would shout mean things, throw rotten food, and even throw stones. Children watched everything. Priests walked behind, trying to get the person to confess their sins while holding up crosses. In Catholic areas, the condemned might get one last chance to confess, but often it was too late to matter. If the crime was really bad, like killing a noble person, attacking the church, or rebelling against the king, the condemned person might suffer even more on the way to the execution site. Sometimes hot metal tools were used to hurt their arms and legs before they even got to the wheel. French records from the 1600s show that this sometimes happened when someone killed their parent or tried to kill the king. Every step of this process was written down in official orders, making sure the punishment followed the law, but also matched how angry the public was. By the time they reached the scaffold, many condemned people could barely stand up, but the executioner, called a Scharfrichter in German, was required by law and tradition to read out loud all the crimes before carrying out the sentence. In some cities, a town crier would announce, "By order of the law and the emperor's justice, this man shall be broken on the wheel for his wicked deeds." The condemned person was then laid out with arms stretched and legs tied, body shaking with fear, before being strapped to the wooden spokes that would soon become the tool of their destruction. Once the condemned person reached the scaffold, the serious ritual of the breaking wheel began. The executioner, carrying a heavy wooden wheel, stood as the main figure in this legal show, doing his job with careful precision. For the condemned, this was the final part of their sentence, with no chance of being saved. The procedure was not just punishment, but a powerful warning to everyone watching. The breaking wheel itself was a large wooden device with thick wooden spokes coming out from an iron center. While it looked different in different places, its purpose was always the same: to completely hold down the condemned person. The process started with taking off the prisoner's outer clothes in front of all the people watching. Their arms and legs were then tied to the wheel's spokes, usually with ropes, though sometimes they were fastened more tightly, making sure they stayed in place during the whole ordeal. The executioner would work methodically through each limb, using an iron hammer or heavy mallet to systematically break the bones. Records from Nuremberg in the 1400s show that the joints were specifically targeted, making the condemned person completely unable to move. While the suffering was certainly terrible, the crowd usually watched in serious silence, witnessing the completion of the legal sentence. For people who committed especially terrible crimes like murder or treason, the punishment could be made longer. Each arm and leg received careful attention, with the executioner making sure the sentence was completely carried out. In certain places like Saxony, and for especially notorious criminals, additional steps might be taken to make the punishment worse before a final merciful blow ended it all. These extreme cases sometimes resulted in long exposure to wind and weather before death finally came. Death by the wheel did not end with the person's last breath. For authorities across medieval and early modern Europe, the intended impact of the punishment went far beyond the moment of execution. The remains, broken and often hard to recognize, were not buried with respect, but instead displayed publicly as a warning, serving as a frightening tool of social control. After the execution, the body was typically placed on top of the same wheel, which was then secured to a tall pole or wooden frame positioned on the edges of town, commonly at a crossroads or near the town's designated gallows field. This location was strategic. It made sure that both travelers and townspeople would regularly pass by and see the visible remains of authorities' justice. Birds would circle overhead. Exposure to rain, sun, and wind gradually erased what had once been a person. Records from Saxony and Bavaria in the 1500s describe cases where remains were left visible for weeks or even months, slowly falling apart while still tied to the wheel. There was no burial cloth, no coffin, and no proper burial. In many Christian communities, this refusal of burial was considered not only a physical rejection, but also a spiritual punishment, a final act of exclusion from both human society and God's grace. One of the most disturbing and widely told accounts of this punishment was that of Christmann Jennepatenga, a German bandit and serial killer captured near Cologne in 1581. He was sentenced to death by the wheel, receiving the full series of prescribed blows as part of the punishment. What happened next, however, was both extraordinary and deeply disturbing. Jennepatenga survived not just for hours, but for 9 full days. Still tied to the wheel, exposed to the open air and given no food or water, he remained awake and able to respond throughout that entire time. Guards were placed nearby to prevent anyone from helping him. His long survival became a morbid spectacle, recorded in documents of the time and later referenced by doctors and historians as one of the most extreme examples of human survival under judicial suffering. Importantly, the refusal of burial was no accident. It was a deliberate act of spiritual punishment. In the Christian worldview of the time, burial in blessed ground was essential for the soul's salvation. By denying this, the authorities tried not only to end a life, but to erase the person's memory, cutting the individual off from both earthly community and eternal hope. The breaking wheel was more than punishment. It revealed the darkest sides of human authority, leaving scars etched deep into civilization's memory. Its chilling legacy remains a stark reminder of justice turned to terror, which current legal practice, born of deterrence, might future historians judge with equal horror. As the ancient Roman thinker Seneca warned, all cruelty springs from weakness.